Police sirens echo in the dark as a single image fades in. A simple government chart. Not a protest. Not a border wall. A budget line. It belongs to one agency. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. The line climbs and plateaus around $10 billion a year, a war-sized budget for an agency most Americans never see, unless it shows up at their workplace, their front door, or their church. ICE was born in the early 2000s, in the post-9/11 security era, with a mission that sounded technical but meant something enormous. Remove all removable aliens. Customs and Border Protection would guard the line, the border. ICE would police everything behind it, the interior of the United States. Factories, suburbs, schools, parking lots, everywhere that didn't look like the border, but still counted. As the years pass, raids become headlines. ICE agents detained 1,600 migrants. Meatpacking plant raided. Workers rounded up. Over 100 people detained without explanation. Hands cuffed, vans loaded, buses pulling away. And then, under Donald Trump's first presidency, one line on a different chart spikes. ICE arrests. Publicly, the justification is simple and powerful. Murderers, drug dealers, violent criminals and vicious gangs. We have to get all of these criminals off our streets. The image is clear. ICE is hunting the worst of the worst. But when you break that arrest chart into 3 layers, the story shifts. One line, people with criminal convictions. Another, people with pending criminal charges. And then a third, people with no criminal record at all. The steepest line isn't the one you think. The sharpest surge is among people with no criminal record whatsoever. So the question shifts from why is ICE hunting criminals to who is ICE actually hunting? And what happens when you pour even more money into that machine? Because if this is what ICE did with a $10 billion budget, Congress is now preparing to give it even more. A major infusion to fuel the most intense spending spree on immigration enforcement in modern U.S. history. So what does that mean in real lives, real families, real communities? To answer that, we have to do 2 things at once. Zoom into the life of one person caught in the system, and zoom out to understand the economic machine that built the system in the first place. We start with a voice. I was born in El Salvador. I came to California in '93. I was 8 years old. His name is Daniel. He grows up in the United States, learns carpentry, electrical work, HVAC, starts a small company in the D.C. area, hiring up to 4 employees. He pays taxes. He builds homes. He builds a life. For decades, he is here legally, as a lawful permanent resident, a green card holder. So when politicians talk about deporting illegal criminals, he doesn't panic. It didn't bother me, he says. I was legal. I thought I was going to be okay. One summer, he's deported. His story only makes sense if you understand a quiet truth about immigration in America. There is no simple line between legal and illegal. On talk shows and campaign stages, immigrants are split into 2 boxes, legal, illegal. But on the ground, the reality looks more like a spectrum. On one end, you have naturalized citizens, people born abroad who became U.S. citizens. On the other, undocumented, unauthorized immigrants, here without formal permission. But between those 2 poles is an entire crowded middle. People waiting for asylum hearings, people with temporary protective status, students and workers on visas, and lawful permanent residents, green card holders like Daniel. Some have papers, but not long-term security. Others have permission to stay, but not full rights. Many are in process, caught in backlogs that stretch for years. Even this rainbow is a simplification. Immigration law in the U.S. is a maze that even lawyers struggle to map. Everyone agrees on at least one thing. The system is old, slow, and broken. Congress hasn't rewritten the core architecture in decades, so each president inherits the same tangled legal web, and then decides where to pull, where to stretch, where to weaponize. For most of his life, Daniel sits solidly in the green card zone. Not a citizen, but legal. Not in danger, he thinks. What he doesn't see is that over time, the focus of enforcement is drifting. Not just toward the people outside the system, but toward people like him. To understand why, we have to step out of the 21st century entirely. We have to go back to the moment the U.S. economy quietly decided it needed a permanent supply of workers it wouldn't fully recognize. The economic engine behind illegality. Early 20th century. Look west. California, Arizona, the Imperial and Central Valleys. Endless fields, not enough hands. The American West has land, water, and demand for food. What it doesn't have is labor. So the U.S. turns to the obvious neighbor, Mexico. For decades, Mexican workers cross the border in a seasonal rhythm. Spring, arrival. Summer, harvest. Fall, processing. Winter, home. They pick lettuce, harvest strawberries, cut broccoli, sort and pack. They sleep in barracks, trailers, shared rooms. And for much of the 20th century, this flow is not only tolerated, it's legally encouraged. Through programs like the Bracero system, the U.S. government formalizes what the economy already figured out. It needs temporary, low-wage labor that comes when needed and leaves when the work ends. If you eat lettuce in the winter in the United States, there's a good chance it came from the desert farmlands of the Southwest, harvested by migrant labor. This isn't a side story to immigration, it is immigration as the economy experiences it. But then, in the 1960s, everything changes. Labor unions and civil rights groups document widespread exploitation. Cramped housing, wage theft, unsafe conditions, no real power to complain or organize. Economists warn that constant access to cheap, vulnerable labor is suppressing wages for everyone else. So, Congress does what Congress used to do. It passes a big immigration reform. It ends the major seasonal worker program. The hope is almost naive. Shut the legal route down, and one of two things will happen. American workers will fill those fields and factories, or employers will raise wages enough to attract them. In practice, something else happens. The work is still there. The demand is still there. The labor flow continues. But now, instead of crossing legally, many workers cross illegally. Instead of coming and going, they stay. They build lives in Fresno, Phoenix, Raleigh, Atlanta. By the late 1980s, an estimated 4 million people are living in the U.S. without legal status, many doing the exact same jobs they had before, now with a different label, undocumented. The economy hasn't changed, the law has. Congress responds in a familiar way, by trying to harden the border. In the 1980s and 1990s, lawmakers pour money into fences, checkpoints, and more agents. Operation Gatekeeper, Operation Hold the Line. The names sound decisive, almost cinematic. On paper, it's a new experiment. Make crossing harder, riskier, and more expensive. Deter the flow. In reality, the experiment backfires. People say, this might be my last chance to cross. I better go now, and I better bring my family. Instead of a seasonal loop, it becomes a one-way door. The undocumented population grows toward 10 million. Workers who used to cycle between two countries now commit fully to one, the one where their labor is needed, their children are born, their communities form. By the 2000s, the data is blunt. Undocumented immigrants are only about 3 to 4% of the total U.S. population, but they make up enormous shares of certain jobs. Look at crop farm work. Native-born workers and legal immigrants are one set of lines. Undocumented workers, another. The unauthorized line dominates the chart. This pattern repeats in agriculture, landscaping, meatpacking, restaurants, hotel cleaning, laundry services, domestic work. A small share of the total population, but a quarter or more of the workforce in key industries. The system has created a paradox. The economy depends on these workers, The law refuses to acknowledge a legal path for them. There is no low-wage worker door in U.S. immigration law. Instead, there are four main doors: high-skilled employment visas, family sponsorship, the diversity visa lottery, asylum refugee programs. If you're a software engineer with a graduate degree, there's a door. A sibling of a U.S. citizen, a door. Lucky in a lottery, a door. Fleeing persecution with the right documentation, a door. If you want to pick lettuce, clean hotels, build houses, or wash dishes, there is no door. So the U.S. quietly runs a two-track system. Officially, it criminalizes the people who fill those roles. Practically, it relies on them. By the late 1990s, something unexpected happens. Instead of doubling down on mass deportation, there's growing political appetite, even among conservatives, for some form of legalization. A recognition that these people are here, they're essential, we need a way to bring them into the light. The president at the time, George W. Bush, is surprisingly vocal about it. Every immigrant, by embracing these ideals, makes our country more, not less, American. He pushes a comprehensive reform that would legalize many undocumented immigrants, create clearer pathways for labor migration. For a brief moment, it looks like the U.S. might actually align its laws with its economic reality. Then, the world changes in a single morning. Planes hit buildings, smoke fills the sky, and immigration gets a new label: national security threat. Post 9/11, the political mood hardens overnight. The 19 hijackers were in the U.S. legally, on visas. The failure wasn't porous borders, it was a system that didn't track, monitor, or understand who was coming and going. So instead of just fixing that blind spot, Washington does something much bigger. It rebrands the entire immigration apparatus. The old Immigration and Naturalization Service, bureaucratic, almost dull, is dismantled. In its place, a new superdepartment, the Department of Homeland Security. Within it, Customs and Border Protection at the border, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, in the interior. Immigration is no longer framed as labor, opportunity, or integration. It's framed as security. Bush's language about making America more American through immigrants gets swallowed by the politics of fear. Terror threats, enemy combatants, watch lists, no-fly lists. Immigration policy is now written in the ink of counterterrorism. And ICE, this new, obscure agency with a broad mandate and growing budget, becomes the interior arm of that mindset. But laws haven't caught up. Congress does not pass sweeping modern reforms, which means every president from this point forward, Republican or Democrat, has to decide. With these old laws, these new agencies, and these economic realities, who counts as a threat? Who counts as essential? And who falls somewhere in between? The first test of that question comes under Barack Obama. We can be a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants, he says. In a way, his entire presidency on immigration is an attempt to live in that contradiction. He wants Congress to pass real reform, but Congress doesn't. He wants to show he's not soft on enforcement, so he presides over record deportation numbers. So many, in fact, that activists nickname him Deporter-in-Chief. He removes hundreds of thousands of people a year, particularly at the border, but also from the interior, through ICE. The key difference is who he tells ICE to target: convicted criminals, people seen as a genuine threat to public safety. Felons, not families, he repeats, criminals, not children. Behind that slogan is a crucial operational choice. For decades, the main pipeline into ICE custody hasn't been workplace raids. It's local jails. Someone gets arrested by local police for theft, for DUI, for a fight. And while they're in custody, their information pings immigration databases. If they lack lawful status, ICE is notified. Agents come to pick them up. But over time, local police departments begin to rebel. They argue, we are not immigration agents. If people are afraid to call us, our cities become less safe. They become sanctuary cities. Contrary to the mythology, sanctuary cities aren't zones where ICE is banned or immigration law disappears. They simply refuse to hold people longer just so ICE can arrive. If someone can post bail, they go home, regardless of immigration status. For a while, that's the uneasy balance. ICE focused more on people in custody with criminal records, local departments drawing a line between public safety and immigration enforcement. But that balance relies on one thing: a political choice from the top that says, we will prioritize threats, not presence alone. That choice ends the moment Donald Trump enters the story. And ICE, for the first time, is told that nearly everyone is back on the table. Donald Trump doesn't enter the immigration story quietly. He launches his first presidential campaign with a sentence that makes headlines around the world. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. From that moment on, immigration isn't just a policy issue. It's the core of his brand. Build the wall. Criminals, rapists, invasion. The nuance of labor markets, legal categories, and economic dependence disappears under a single narrative. Immigrants equals danger. He wins. And almost immediately, a quiet but crucial line inside the government changes. ICE's mission is no longer focus on threats. It becomes everyone is a target. Under Obama, ICE had already deported record numbers of people, but there were priorities. Those with serious criminal convictions, people seen as actual security risks. Trump's first administration tears up the priority hierarchy. Agents are told, if someone is deportable, they are eligible. If someone is anywhere near your operation and you suspect they're unauthorized, they're on the table. This has a bureaucratic name: collateral enforcement. In practice, it means this: if ICE goes to arrest one person at an address, and they find 5 more people there without papers, they can arrest all of them. Not because those 5 were a threat, but because they were there. Every apartment complex, every job site, every street encounter becomes a potential multi-arrest opportunity. This is when many Americans first really see ICE. Video after video circulates. Agents surrounding homes at dawn. Workplaces cordoned off. Parents pulled away in parking lots. Children watching from car seats. Federal agents launched raids in one of the first visible signs of President Trump's mass deportation plan. Yet, for all the spectacle, Trump's team keeps slamming into a wall of its own: the courts. He tries a Muslim ban. Judges call it unconstitutional. He tries to strip funding from sanctuary cities. Courts block it. He tries to end DACA, protection for people brought to the U.S. as children, again challenged in court. Trump 1.0 is loud, aggressive, and often legally sloppy. His immigration architects learn a painful lesson. If you want to transform the system, you can't just be ruthless. You have to be careful. They begin quietly preparing for a second chance. Meanwhile, the political landscape shifts again. Joe Biden wins the 2020 election. At the southern border, the numbers respond almost instantly. People arrive with a simple, dangerous expectation. The anti-immigrant president is gone. The door might be open. But the real drivers are deeper than partisan change. COVID has destabilized Latin American economies. The U.S. has weathered the crisis better than many countries. A mixture of rumor, hope, desperation, and cartel messaging pushes more people north. The chart of border encounters spikes. Some are expelled under a Trump-era policy that Biden keeps for a time, a fast-track expulsion system that bypasses normal asylum processing. Others are released into the U.S. while they wait for court dates, joining the crowded, in-between zone of legal limbo. Critics seize on the images and graphs. Invasion, Biden's border crisis. The numbers themselves are confusing because they hide something: repeat crossings. When people are rapidly expelled without formal processing, many try again. The same person might show up in the data 5, 6, 10 times. The charts don't show that it's the same face, same family, same desperation. They just show a line surging upward. For political messaging, the nuance doesn't matter. Trump returns to the stage, pointing to the graphs like a prosecutor presenting evidence. It's a massive invasion at our southern border. In parallel, a new phrase gains traction: migrant crime. Cable news shows mugshots and violent footage. A murder committed by a man in the country illegally. Undocumented farm worker accused in a gruesome crime. One case after another, presented as a pattern. The data tells a different story. Undocumented immigrants are less likely to be incarcerated than native-born citizens. Communities with more foreign-born residents often see lower rates of violent and property crime. But most people don't spend evenings parsing criminology studies. They watch the stories that feel vivid, frightening, true. By 2024, the share of Americans who think legal immigrants pose a major crime risk has roughly doubled compared to a few years earlier. Fear is no longer focused only on the undocumented. It starts to leak into how people see anyone born elsewhere. Trump rides that wave. He promises the largest deportation operation in American history. And this time, when he wins the presidency, his people arrive with a blueprint. Trump 2.0, breaking the brakes. On day one of his second term, Trump declares a national emergency at the border. He sends the military there. He freezes refugee admissions. He suspends broad swaths of asylum processing. His legal team digs through old statutes and finds obscure authorities, including an 18th century war law, to justify new forms of fast-track deportations, particularly for people labeled as gang members. The goal is simple and sweeping: make it easier to deport people, make it harder to claim protection, make the whole process faster. He leans on loopholes in existing law to expand expedited removal, a process that allows deportation without a full hearing in immigration court. He tells immigration judges to aggressively deny certain categories of asylum claims, pushing cases out of the system as quickly as possible. He moves to roll back temporary protected status, TPS, for several 100,000 people who had been allowed to stay in the U.S. because their home countries were unsafe due to war, disaster, or collapse. He cuts student visas. He opens a bizarre new policy, an exit bonus, offering $1,000 to undocumented immigrants who voluntarily leave the country. Then comes the STEC. Fines of $1,000 per day for people who have final deportation orders but haven't left. It sounds almost corporate. Exit bonus, non-compliance penalty. But the intent is clear. Make staying unbearable. Make leaving feel like the only rational option. Above all of this hangs one target: deport 1 million people in the first year. There's one big problem. The chart at the border is falling. The surge from the early Biden years has cooled. Encounters drop. So where do you find your 1 million people? You stop looking outward and start inward. You turn fully to ICE. The 3,000 per day quota. Remember that ICE arrest chart? It already spiked when Trump first took office years earlier. Now his immigration czar, Stephen Miller, adds something new: a quota. We are looking to set a goal of a minimum of 3,000 arrests for ICE every day. 3,000 arrests per day. On paper, it's just a number. In practice, it's a pressure system. To understand the scale, compare it. New York City's police department, with roughly 36,000 officers, makes around 700 arrests per day. ICE's dedicated enforcement arm? Around 6,000 officers, tasked with 3,000 arrests per day. 6,000 officers? 3,000 daily arrests. Half an arrest per officer, per day, every day. The pressure those line agents are feeling to make as many arrests as they possibly can is unimaginable, one expert says. To meet quotas, ICE can't just focus on the worst of the worst. There aren't enough of them, so they turn to everyone else. They fan out into restaurants, factories, construction sites, apartment complexes, church parking lots, schools. They raid a child's birthday party under the banner of going after gang members and arrest toddlers along the way. They break windows of cars caught in protests, pepper spray drivers, drag people out in front of their children. They stop distinguishing between people with serious convictions, people with minor past infractions, people with no criminal record at all. If they're deportable, they count. The arrest graph responds. The line representing no criminal record keeps climbing until it crosses the line of people with convictions. More and more of ICE's work is no longer about removing criminals. It's about removing bodies. The human cost of numbers. This is where Daniel re-enters the story. Remember, he is a green card holder. He has lived in the U.S. since childhood. He runs a small business. He hires workers. He's married to a U.S. citizen. But he has a record. I did get in trouble as a teenager, he says. A small marijuana offense from years ago. A minor case in the era before legalization spread. The kind of thing many Americans barely remember from their youth. For ICE, under a quota system, it's a hook. In March 2025, Daniel is picked up. He's sent to an immigration detention center, a place that, in theory, is like a jail holding people temporarily while their case is heard. In reality, it feels like a punishment facility. Food is horrible, he tells us. The milk is spoiled. The bread has mold. I lost 35 pounds in less than 2 months. He describes showers filled with insects, floors where people sleep without proper bedding, officers telling detainees, "You guys don't have any rights." Legally, that's false. The Fifth Amendment guarantees due process to every person in the United States, not every citizen, every person. That's why deportation cases go through immigration courts. That's why people like Daniel do have the right to make their case, to argue that they've built lives, families, businesses. And on paper, Daniel has a strong claim. Decades in the U.S., legal permanent resident status, American spouse, long work history. He hires a lawyer. He prepares to fight. Then he's told, it could take a year or more to get through the full process. A year? In those conditions? The living conditions were so bad that I basically asked to get deported myself, he says. This is one of the darkest ironies of the system. You technically have rights, but the conditions are so harsh and the timeline so long that many people choose to leave rather than endure them. One immigration lawyer puts it bluntly. Detention is so punishing that it's impossible to have a fair process. People are effectively coerced into giving up their cases. Daniel signs the papers. He is deported to El Salvador, a country he barely remembers. Everywhere I go, they know I'm not from here, he says. I'm still trying to adapt. His story isn't an accident. It's a byproduct of math. 3,000 arrests per day. A chart that must keep climbing. A system that sees people like him as numbers to hit targets. The economy pushes back. But there is one force even a hard-line administration can't completely ignore. Business. The same industries that quietly relied on undocumented labor for decades now watch in panic as ICE raids their workplaces and removes the workers they depend on. Farm owners, restaurant chains, hotel operators, construction firms. They call, they lobby, they complain. Trump, who built his brand on business success, hears them. On his social platform, he acknowledges the uncomfortable truth. His own policies are taking away very good long-time workers, jobs that are almost impossible to replace. The same reality this film has traced for an hour is now being admitted by the man leading the crackdown. That same day, an email goes out to ICE supervisors. Stop large-scale workplace raids in agriculture, restaurants, and hotels. Stop arresting non-criminal collaterals at those work sites. On the graph, the line representing arrests of people with no criminal record slows its climb, but it doesn't fall. ICE still has quotas. The interior is still the target, and everyone without the right papers is still technically fair game. Which brings us to people like Maria, living in a permanent state of maybe. Maria isn't her real name. She's been in the U.S. for decades. She has raised children here. She works, she pays rent, she pays taxes. She's part of that invisible backbone, the people who clean, cook, harvest, care, repair. But she doesn't have legal status. For years, she lived in a space of quiet risk, aware that she was vulnerable, but also aware that, practically, the system often looked the other way. Now, that risk feels sharper. She hears about raids at homes, at churches, outside court hearings. She hears that ICE detain people after they show up to mandatory appointments. She hears that green card holders are being taken, not just the undocumented. I feel like any knock at the door could be the end, she says. Her anxiety is constant. Her world shrunk to the commute between home, work, and school. And she's being talked about in a new way. Not as a worker, not as a neighbor, not even as undocumented, as a criminal. You are, by definition, a criminal, one hardline official argues, and therefore you are subject to deportation. This isn't a new trick. In 1931, a federal report observed, the idea that all newcomers should be regarded with suspicion and blamed for crime was already almost as old as the colonies. Nearly a century later, that script is being reused, with new technology, new slogans, new faces. We see footage of elderly business owners slammed to the ground, mothers pinned down in front of their children, protesters pepper-sprayed, a woman shot and injured near an ICE facility. Meanwhile, officials insist, these operations are about enforcing immigration laws, not instilling fear. The charts, the quotas, the raids, the rhetoric, they all converge on one reality. A system that once quietly tolerated a shadow workforce is now being weaponized against it, while still consuming the fruits of its labor. And as Congress votes to raise ICE's budget even higher, the question is no longer abstract. It's brutally concrete. What does a more powerful ICE do in a country that relies on the very people it is being paid to remove? The chart rises again. Congress, under pressure, under fear, under the weight of televised border images, approves the largest immigration enforcement funding surge in modern American history. ICE's budget jumps. Detention capacity expands. Private prison corporations quietly celebrate. Their stock spikes. Suddenly, the enforcement machine has more money, more officers, more legal authority, and more political backing than at any point since 9/11. But the public conversation never touches the largest contradiction of all. America needs the very people it is now trying to deport. The economic paradox no one wants to solve. For decades, the U.S. economy relied on a silent understanding. You pick the lettuce. You clean the hotel rooms. You wash the dishes. You process the meat. You raise the children. You mow the lawns. You roof the houses. And, in return, the country looks the other way. It's not a law. It's not compassion. It's an unofficial pact between Congress, business, and millions of undocumented workers. Now, with quotas and raids and expanded enforcement, that pact is collapsing. Industries panic. CEOs call the White House. Farm owners send desperate warnings. Restaurant associations issue press releases. Hotel groups beg for alternatives. Even Trump, who built his campaigns on anti-immigrant rhetoric, has to acknowledge the truth publicly. Very good, long-time workers are being taken away, jobs that are almost impossible to replace. It's not ideology, it's arithmetic. If you removed every undocumented worker tomorrow, 40 to 50% of farm labor would disappear overnight. Entire restaurant regions would collapse. Construction deadlines would explode. Hospitality industries in cities like New York, Miami, Houston, and Las Vegas would grind to a halt. The U.S. has no alternative workforce for these jobs, and there is no legal pathway for low-wage labor to enter the country. The four doors of immigration leave a wide gap: high-skill workers, family sponsorship, lottery, asylum refugee pipelines. None of them serve the economy that exists. There is no fifth door for the people the market depends on the most. Instead, we created a shadow system, and now we are criminalizing the shadows. The new targets. ICE once focused on the undocumented. Then it focused on those with criminal histories. Then it expanded to people encountered along the way. Now, under new legal interpretations, anyone with a technically deportable past can be swept up. That includes green card holders like Daniel, people who committed minor offenses decades ago, asylum seekers waiting for hearings, visa holders who overstayed unintentionally, TPS recipients whose protections were revoked, people ordered deported years ago but never removed, people who fled gang violence but can't prove persecution on paper. The once clear categories blur. What used to be legal, semi-legal, illegal is now safe and not safe. Maria, who has lived in the U.S. for decades, feels that shift every day. Her life shrinks. She no longer drives far from home. She stops attending certain community events. She avoids the supermarket near a police substation. Her children text her constantly. "Are you okay? Did you get home?" Fear becomes routine. But fear isn't a malfunction of the system. Fear is the system. When due process becomes a mirage. Legally, everyone in the U.S. has due process rights. In practice, detention makes those rights almost unreachable. Immigration courts are overwhelmed. Over 3 million cases pending. Hearings scheduled years into the future. Judges pressured to accelerate denials. Asylum standards tightened. Legal representation scarce. And detention centers, many run by private firms, have every incentive to keep beds full. The worse the conditions, the more effective the system becomes. People sign removal orders not because they lost their case, but because they lost their hope. That's why Daniel gave up. He didn't lose in court. He surrendered to survive. The system didn't break the law. It broke him. And through that breaking comes a steady stream of voluntary deportations, the invisible fuel needed to meet arrest quotas. What happens when ICE gets even more money? With Congress expanding ICE's budget to levels higher than most countries' militaries, the agency can now hire thousands more officers, expand detention capacity dramatically, build new regional holding facilities, deploy advanced surveillance technology, increase coordination with local police, scale up rapid removal operations, widen the net of who counts as deportable. If the early months of the second Trump administration look like a tightening fist, the next phase will look like the fist acquiring armor. Immigration lawyers already warn we're heading into a level of enforcement we've never seen in American history. And, unlike the early 2000s, when Congress tried to restore control, today's operations are sharpened by lessons learned. Write policies to survive court challenges. Invoke old statutes as new weapons. Use executive authority aggressively. Reinterpret regulations to accelerate removals. Funnel resources into interior enforcement. Build public messaging around crime and order. It's not chaos. it's architecture. And architecture scales. When a country changes what American means, there's a tragic irony in the fact that the current crackdown is being led by the son of an immigrant. It highlights something deeper. Immigration policy is not about where you were born. It's about who the system currently benefits. For decades, corporations benefited. They lobbied quietly to protect the labor supply. Now, political momentum benefits from fear, and fear wins elections. Trump isn't inventing a new story. He's reviving an old American one. In 1931, that federal report warned about blaming immigrants for crime. In the 1800s, people said the same about Irish Catholics. Before that, Chinese laborers. Before them, Germans. Before them, the Polish. Before them, the Italians. Every generation finds a new group to label as dangerous. The names change. The pattern doesn't. Because framing outsiders as threats is one of the oldest political technologies on Earth. It's efficient, it's emotional, it's simple, and it works. Where this all goes. As ICE expands, as raids grow, as arrests climb, as budgets swell, the country edges closer to a model not seen in U.S. history. A national system of interior policing with massive resources and minimal oversight, targeting a population so deeply woven into the economy that removing them will cause shocks that ripple through agriculture, construction, hospitality, logistics, childcare, and food supply chains. Economists call this a structural contradiction. Politicians call it law and order. Business owners call it economic suicide. Families call it terror. Immigration lawyers call it unprecedented. People like Maria call it everyday. The philosophical ending, the question that decides the future. Every democracy reaches a pressure point where laws, identities, and economic realities collide. Sometimes the breaking point is loud. Sometimes it's violent. Sometimes it's sudden. But, like now, it is silent, legal, methodical, normalized. When people say, America is deporting so many people, they're not describing a glitch in the system. They're describing the system functioning exactly as built, by Congress, by courts, by decades of political incentives, and by millions of citizens who never understood the machinery operating under their feet. The final question isn't, how did this happen? We just spent thousands of words answering that. The real question is, what happens next? Because systems like this only hold as long as the public believes two things. The problem is too big to understand. The people affected are too different to care about. But the moment those illusions break, the moment the public sees the pipes, the entire system becomes unstable. Budgets can be rewritten, statutes can be amended, quotas can be canceled, agencies can be restructured, courts can change direction, elections can produce new mandates. Nothing here is natural, nothing is permanent, and nothing is beyond repair. The question is, will the American public look up before the architecture becomes too entrenched to undo? Will they? Will you? Because the future of immigration in America will not be decided by an agency. It will be decided by whether people believe they still have the power to redesign the system before the system convinces them that they don't.